Let's now get you the latest as far as the Russian-Ukraine crisis is concerned. Forces from Russia continue to target cities across Ukraine, with shelling continuing in capital Kyiv. There's a curfew in Kyiv. 5 people were killed overnight. UK Ministry of Defense claims that Moscow's forces are struggling to maintain the pace of their advance across Ukraine. Security officials said that Russian troops are struggling to overcome challenges posed by Ukraine's terrain, which has confined them to the country's roads and highways. Ukraine has claimed that Russia has caused $500 billion in damages since the invasion began. Jonathan is joining us for more details at this point. Jonathan, what's the latest that you can tell us on that's happening on ground at this point? We also know that some of the Eastern Bloc country prime ministers are in Ukraine to show their support for President Zelensky.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag of information here today. As you say, overnight shellings, nothing new there, but more civilian casualties, which is tragic. There has been a glimmer of hope in the besieged city of Mariupol, which you may recall has been under intense military bombardment for the last nearly 2 weeks now. We understand that yesterday about 3,000 cars carrying refugees, largely women and children, managed to escape from that city, which is extraordinary when one considers that they were trapped there, as I say, for some 10 to 12 days. On the diplomatic front, as you say, the leaders from the smaller European nations of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia have arrived in Kiev. They've been holding talks with President Zelensky, which is certainly a positive step. And we understand that President Joe Biden himself is planning a trip to Europe next week. Meanwhile, we are still locked in the 5th round of diplomatic talks. Zelensky says that positive noises have been made. He says the Russian position is starting to look a little more realistic. This may indeed be a reflection of the fact that, as you say, the Russian advance has, to all intents and purposes, stalled now outside of Kiev, although they continue to make substantial ground in the south. So we'll have to wait and see what those diplomatic developments produce.
And Jonathan, any word on the talks and how they are progressing? Because that also is the other aspect. On one hand, these talks are continuing, but the shelling and bombing seems to be no respite from that.
Yeah, these things often go hand in hand, don't they? It seems quite ludicrous, quite paradoxical that you can talk about peace at the same time as lobbing thousands of lethal shells into a city. But that's how wars work, unfortunately. The other thing about diplomatic talks is that, there's this sort of diplomatic language that all diplomats use. It's not really English. You have to read between the lines. So when both sides say that positive progress has been made, I think the most one can assume from that is that, they're not actually at daggers drawn now. But I think Zelensky, he's not a typical politician. He's not a typical weasel word diplomat. He seems to speak his mind. So when he says that he feels the Russian position is a little more realistic, I'm inclined to give some weight to that, definitely.
Fair enough. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us and getting us that perspective from what's happening on ground. Meanwhile,